Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Starting off with Best Journalist nominee at the World MMA Awards, Mike Abon. He's in Toronto. MMA Junkie Radio co-host Goes. He's here in Las Vegas, the fight capital. And Danny Segura, the host of Hablemos MMA. He is in Miami, 305 in the house. Goes will also double up on the ones and twos. Let's get started. This past weekend at UFC 279, we had three fights at the top of the bill that had only been made 30 hours beforehand. Granted, the fights involved the original top six fighters that the UFC had promoted for the card, but we were dealt new matchups due to Khamzat Chimaev weighing in 7.5 pounds over during the official morning weigh-ins. Did the UFC do the right thing by shaking up the card over one guy missing weight, or did it set a bad precedent? 4 minutes are on the clock. Mike, you're leading off.
I think this was the right play under the circumstances. I mean, did they really have any other choices? Like, it seemed to me like once Khamzat Chimaev missed weight, Nate Diaz wasn't going to be taking that fight with him. So what options are you left with outside of that? You have to create a new fight. If you want Nate still on the card, headlining, of course, he's got the biggest name of the bunch at this moment. So you had to do something. And when you look at kind of the six available fighters there, I think the combination they went with is ultimately what made the most sense. So out of a completely disastrous situation, so much went into it. I think they made the best of it. Maybe it could have panned out a little bit better in terms of, how the fights played out or whatever. But I think if you look at the pairings, it was fine for what it was. And man, it was just such a crazy week. One of the wildest stretches I can remember in UFC history, just everything that was going on behind the scenes on Friday, from Thursday at the press conference too, pretty wild. And, I guess it worked out somewhat for the best. Nate Diaz gets to leave on his high moment. Khamzat Chimaev, for better or worse, is kind of one of the new faces of the UFC coming out of this too, in my opinion. So yeah, it was not what they planned for, certainly, but the UFC, to their credit, very good at making stuff like this happen. Credit to the fighters, their teams for agreeing to these changes. It was just nutty circumstances for all.
Especially Li Jingliang, man. He weighed in 10 pounds less than his opponent. Goes, your thoughts?
Look, I think at the end of the day, the UFC did the best they could with what they had. And at the time of the announcement, I actually, as I was processing it all, I feel like a lot of people felt this way as well. I felt like maybe we ended up with a better card. But, I understand where the UFC comes from financially, people coming all the way from different places to Vegas to see these fights. I know you want to make people happy. But as the night started to play out, it just started to turn into a little bit of a disaster. And I think what it comes down to is there's a reason why fighters have these training camps, right? Why they last so long. They have to prepare, not just mentally, physically, all the homework that goes into it. We got stuck with a lot of sparring sessions, guys, and it's really not the fighters' fault. This is a dangerous sport. They're putting it all out on the line. They're right there in front of each other, and there's so much on the line that I think the fact that they probably got compensated pretty well, I think they just kind of took their foot off the gas in certain fights. You look at Rodriguez and Li Jingliang, he's just outsized in that fight. There was this feeling out process that took so long in some of these fights. What happened with Kevin Holland and Khamzat and the touch of gloves. It was kind of a mess, man. So I think they did the best that they could do with what they had, but I think going forward, they might have to reevaluate these situations and maybe not force everything on us.
Yeah, and even old Nate Diaz was kind of taking 20-second timeouts, maybe more 5 seconds, but he was like, nah, then he'd go back in and engage. It was bizarre. How about you, Danny?
Yeah, I think the UFC had no option, right? Because if Nate Diaz wasn't going to fight, how can they possibly put on a pay-per-view with just Khamzat? Like when Kevin Holland versus Khamzat is going to headline a pay-per-view event, they had to. They had no choice but to give in and put Nate Diaz in whatever position he wanted to be in. But with that being said, I do think the matchups were better than the original card. I think this is also a lesson learned for the UFC. I understand what they were trying to do with the matchmaking with Khamzat and Nate Diaz. But at the end of the day, you just got to listen to the fans. I mean, this main event between Tony Ferguson and Nate Diaz got way more love leading up to the card than Khamzat and Nate did. I think the UFC needs to listen to the fans a little bit more. I know they have their own plans as well. But yeah, all in all, I think they avoided a disaster, and they did the best they possibly could with the ingredients, with the fighters that were available to them.
I agree, fellas. The UFC did a good job of patching it up, delivering the show, but I think they're the ones that actually delivered a subpar product to begin with. I mean, look how tight the Abu Dhabi show is, the next pay-per-view, and it's been set for like 3 months. And this one, they were throwing matchups at the last minute, catch weights, miss weights, what a mess. But whatever, we did have some fights, and we move on. All right, and we move on here on Spinning Back Clique to topic 2. As you all know by now, Nate Diaz submitted Tony Ferguson in the new main event that was created. He has now fulfilled his contract in the UFC and is free to work outside the UFC if he chooses. However, with Diaz's popularity, there appears to be many options for him inside and outside of the cage. What would you like to see him do next? That is the question here. 4 minutes are on the clock. Goes, it's on you, sir.
I want to see him grab as many sponsorships as possible. I want him to get into a tour bus. I want him to tour the country. He needs to make up for time that the UFC made a lot of money off of his name. Now is the time to cash in on some of those checks that went to them. They should be going to him. He also needs to turn into Clubber Lang. He needs to be like Clubber Lang, Stock and Rocky, except his Rocky's going to be Jake Paul. Regardless of what happens with Anderson Silva, the bigger fight will always be Jake Paul. And he's going to make a lot of money. So he has to be in that kid's face constantly. He has to be at that fight. He has to cause trouble. I know that won't be hard to do, right? But here's the thing. When it comes to promoting, you do one or the other, or surround yourself with people that are going to help you get this job done, because you can't have half-ass fighting, especially, if you're going to be going into boxing, it's new territory. BKFC is probably going to come with some outrageous contract that he could definitely do. But I don't know. The Nate Diaz that we saw this Saturday kind of looked a little tuned out. It looked like he was already looking towards the future. I just hope that he puts a lot towards that future. But the big payday, of course, is Jake Paul.
All right. How about you, Danny? Which direction would you direct Nate Diaz?
Honestly, I'm not too picky with whatever he decides to do next. I'll watch. What I don't want him to do is bare knuckle boxing. I know some people have suggested it, but cuts and Nate Diaz, I don't want any of that. Also, something that I'd like to throw out there, I don't really care what happens next, but what I do care about is that at some point we do see that trilogy of fight between him and Conor McGregor. It's easily the biggest rivalry in the sport. I mean, just look at the pay-per-view numbers. It's the biggest. They're 1-1. I think their styles are made for each other. Nate Diaz brings the best out of Conor McGregor and vice versa. So I want to see that fight no matter what. So I just hope that Nate Diaz leaving the UFC doesn't mean that we won't get this down the line, because, they are in their 30s, especially Nate in his late 30s. So the clock is ticking. Maybe we have 1 or 2 more years of them competing. And if Conor McGregor is still in the UFC and Nate Diaz doesn't go back, maybe we do miss out on a trilogy fight, which I think would be a catastrophe and a bummer.
And that's the one that could possibly headline the stadium, they say. But yeah, by the time they fight, Nate could be almost 40. Mike Bond, how about you, man?
I think both these guys are pretty much on point with what's going to happen. I think it's going to be a combination of both here. I think the writing has been on the wall for quite a while at this point when it comes to Nate Diaz. He wanted to fight out his UFC contract. He's going to go box Jake Paul most likely, unless Jake Paul gets, just completely humiliated and clowned by Anderson Silva. I think if he loses, a decision, 8 rounds, something like that, you could still do Paul versus Diaz, but might not have the same steam on it as if Paul was to beat Anderson Silva. But nevertheless, I think that is the clear fight they want to make. It's going to be a huge money fight. Million pay-per-views, whatever the case may be. This is the one that's going to happen. And then I think Nate Diaz is probably going to be back in the UFC. He's said it pretty much every time throughout fight week. He said it at the press conference. He has no intentions on not being back in the UFC. I think he just wants to go out, have that little bit of freedom for himself, show that I fought this out. I'm able to do something that's completely detached, unrelated to the UFC. I can be a draw here, capitalize on all the work I put in. And I think he'll be back to do that Conor McGregor trilogy. They could maybe do it outside the UFC, depending what happens with McGregor. He's got 2 fights left on his own contract, but look at the heartache that the UFC put Nate Diaz through to get out of his contract. Just imagine what they're going to do to Conor McGregor before that guy can see freedom on his own. So it's going to be, a huge tail to get there. I think the most likely thing for Diaz versus McGregor 3 would be in the UFC. So I think it's pretty clear what happens with Nate Diaz. Congrats to him for kind of getting out with, his health and not going through a Khamzat Chimaev fight.
Good stuff, guys. All right, let's go to topic number 3 here. After a controversial week outside the octagon, Khamzat Chimaev was able to get the job done inside the octagon versus Kevin Holland. That was his new opponent. First round submission for Boers. But remember, this fight took place at a catchweight at 180 pounds, and Chimaev was a title contender at 170 pounds. As you all know, Chimaev has also fought at middleweight. To be fair, he's got options. Taking everything into account, where should the promotion book Chimaev next? 4 minutes are on the clock, and Danny, you get the party started this time.
Man, going into this event, I thought if Khamzat Chimaev were to pick up a win, which was most likely the outcome facing Nate Diaz, that he was going to get a title shot regardless, whether it was going to be at 170 or at 185. A title fight was next. Now I don't feel that way due to the weight miss. How can you put a guy, especially at 170, in a title fight, not having guarantee that he can make the weight? And how can you put him in a title fight at 185 and reward him after he just caused a havoc that almost canceled really an entire event if Nate Diaz wouldn't have fought? So really, he's got to fight one more time. So I'd love to see him fight just one more time at 170. I think the UFC needs to give him another chance. Keep in mind, this is his first weight miss in the UFC banner. So give him a fight. So why not Colby Covington? I like that fight. It's a top contender fight. It makes a lot of sense. I want to see what he does against a top-level wrestler because clearly we know what he can do against non-wrestlers. Let's see what he can do against one of the better grapplers. So Colby Covington versus Khamzat Chimaev makes all the sense in the world. Obviously, if Colby Covington is able to fight, we know that he's got some legal issues going on with Jorge Masvidal, so maybe that's not available. But if it's not Colby Covington, any other top contender at 170. But one more chance at 170. If he misses again, that's it. 185 is your new weight class. No more 170.
All right, and I want to see that fight that you just named off at for 5 rounds. How about you, Mike Bond?
I think we all want to see Khamzat versus Covington, but I like how we're all just like, just make it like Colby Covington will just be like, hey, yeah, sign me up for that. No issues. You know, that's not who he's proven to be. It's going to be a nightmare trying to get Colby Covington's side done for that fight. But if they can do it, all power to them. I think we'd all like to see them. That is the fight to make rankings wise, title contention wise, all those different things. I agree with Danny. No way you can give Khamzat a title shot at 170 right now. This would be the perfect fight to prove himself. I do worry about him hitting that weight, especially with this mysterious health issue that he apparently had that stopped him from cutting weight, even though he looked damn good, you know, getting in there and actually competing. I don't know what health issue he was actually dealing with, but nevertheless, I guess give him the benefit of the doubt. But if you go back to the Li Jingliang fight he had after the long layoff in Abu Dhabi, he struggled to make that way in too. And, you know, there was a little Daniel Cormier towel trickery going on with that one. So this guy's definitely forming a little bit of a track record here when it comes to maybe some struggles to hit it. And I think, you know, the door is wide open for him to go to 185. I think the title shot queue for them is probably just as quick for him. He goes out there, he beats, you know, Apollo Costa, someone like that. I think he's right there for the winner of Izzy and Pereira, especially if Izzy wins. So options for Khamzat Chimaev. It's just a matter of how much trust does the UFC put in. Will they trust him to book him at 170 and give him that chance? If not, I think you got to do a 185 fight.
Okay, how about you? Goes wrap up.
Man, I think, look, one thing we have to really look at here is it doesn't really matter who made the decision on the weight cut and all that. He just didn't make it. And if he didn't make it in the fight capital of the world for one of the biggest fights he could possibly be a part of, I think that's going to be tough. We send him the middleweight. We turn this into a movie, guys. You've seen Kill Bill before, right? All right. He just went through Big Mouth, a.k.a. Kevin Holland. Done. Move on to the Eraser, right? They got beef. Let's settle that one. He's on this beef tour. Let him settle that beef. From there, he moves on to possibly Bobby Knuckles. I know he's saying good things about him. If not, he goes to Bill himself, Israel Adesanya. I think the path at middleweight will be a lot more fun for him. And at the end of the day, like welterweight, just like Danny said, he struggled. This is the biggest stage. He didn't make it. I think we just kind of put that off to the past and we move on to a welterweight career with this guy.
You mean middleweight career?
Or middleweight, yeah.
Okay. All right. Good stuff. Different angles covered here. I like it, fellas. We move on to topic 4. Let's talk about another OG in the game, Tony Ferguson. What did you make of his performance? This was his 5th loss in a row for the former interim lightweight champion. God, at one point, though, he won 12 in a row. Times have changed. All right. 4 minutes are on the clock. Mike, we're coming back at you.
Yeah, it's sad to see, you know, what's become the state of Tony Ferguson's career in many ways. I mean, this is the guy who missed out on so many big fight opportunities with Habib and He was one of the most dangerous, fearless guys for a stretch there. And I think, I don't know which exactly scenario, but maybe the first time he was scheduled against Khabib, the second time, maybe he could have won that fight. Who knows? But that seems so far in the distant past now. I had some serious concerns about him being on this card against Li Jingliang less than 4 months after the Michael Chandler knockout. There was just a lot of things that I didn't really like. I liked his attitude coming into the week, but I think the switch over to the Nate Diaz fight was like the best possible thing for him. He definitely got paid. He got the payday that he probably deserved for some of these other big fights. He gets a pay-per-view headliner. He fights, a fellow OG in Nate Diaz. I think this kind of broke the best possible way it could for him. And as far as like the performance and the loss, I know it's 5 in a row, but I kind of want to give the guy a mulligan at this point. I mean, he did the UFC a favor in fighting Li Jingliang on 3 weeks' notice when they needed some more name recognition on the card because Khamzat versus Nate Diaz by itself was not moving tickets in-house. So he stepped up and did that, and then he steps up again when the card gets shuffled, takes on an opponent he wasn't training for, 5 rounds, which he was not training for in this scenario. So, like, Tony Ferguson was the biggest company guy in the world over this past month to the UFC, and I'm quite confident they're going to reward him with a, semi-favorable matchup going into the next one. He's going to get, if he keeps losing 1, 2, maybe 3 more fights to kind of close out his career here. So, yeah, Tony Ferguson, respect to the guy. Obviously, he would have loved to come into this week and get a win, but it didn't shake out that way for him.
All right, a mulligan from Mike Bond for Kukui. How about you, Ghost?
Yeah, in a way, I kind of understand him and how he performed in that fight. Obviously he was rewarded very well, and maybe that took off a lot of the stress of what was going on. But there's just so much going on in the situation. It's not really Tony Ferguson. I think it's the situation that kind of took over for everything. How many times has he done things for the company? I think really what happened was everything that went down with Nate Diaz, the money, everything. I think it just kind of took away a little bit of that killer instinct from Tony Ferguson. Taking a fight on short notice took away a little bit of that killer instinct that you developed in a training camp. I think that was gone from Tony Ferguson. And we've seen him fight before, but we've never seen him fight like this. He looked a little slow. He just looked a little complacent with things that were going on. And honestly, I really just feel like the stress of what happened with the card, I think that's what kind of gave us that Tony Ferguson. There's a track record with this guy and the way that he fights. So I don't think anybody can doubt him. I feel like the next time around, we'll probably see a better version of Tony Ferguson, more of what we're going to be seeing from him in the future.
Yeah. All right. And Danny, wrap things up here. What'd you think of the OG Tony Ferguson?
To be honest, I don't think he looked good. He lost to Nate Diaz, who's not really a top guy. Yes, it was a competitive fight until the submission, but even then, I didn't like how he was taking some of the shots. Like, he would turn his back and run, and his corner would call him out on it and be like, "Hey, don't turn your back, don't turn your back." And all in all, I just didn't like how he looked. But I do agree with Mike. We got to give him a little bit of wiggle room because he fought in a new weight class, and he didn't really have a whole lot of time to acclimate to 170 pounds. So maybe that had something to do with it. Also, he went from fighting the Leech to Nate Diaz, completely different opponent, also 5 rounds. So I think there's enough wiggle room to be like, okay, maybe we shouldn't be screaming retirement right now, but 5 losses in a row or 5 losses in a row. So I think from now on, I'm glad that fight with the Leech didn't happen, because I think it would have not been great given how Ferguson looked. Right now, just put him in the Legends division. Have him fight a Masvidal. Have him fight a Conor McGregor in his return. Have him fight some of these guys that are, closer to his age. I do not want to see him against the Leech, Khamzat, Rakhmonov, any of those young killer up-and-coming, any of the killers at 155. Just keep him with some of the older guys, some of the same matchmaking, because I think that's where he's at in his career.
Yeah, 15 pounds is a lot, man. They usually wind up coming back anyway. Happened to RDA, happened to Kevin Lee. So, all right, we'll move on here. Great stuff, though, so far from the guys. Topic 5, Irene Aldana. She picked up a big win to stake her claim to a title shot against Amanda Nunes at 135 pounds. A liver shot delivered from her back. Very unique, an up kick to the liver. Wow. Does she deserve the next title shot, fellas? Or would you rather see the trilogy come to a conclusion versus Juliana Pena? So Pena versus Nunes, or even Nunes versus Caitlin Vargas. That's another option. We got options, fellas. 4 minutes on the clock. Goes. Take it away.
Well, look, man, there was nothing in that Juliana Pena that really screamed, we need to see this again, let alone right away, right? Eventually we're going to get to it, but now is not the time. So let's eliminate that. If you look at Vieira and you see what she's done, a streak over two, a win streak with wins over two champions, that's a big deal, man. Aldana's on a similar streak, 2 wins. This fight, she looked great in round 1, but round 2 really wasn't going her way. And round 3 kind of wasn't going her way as well. But that doesn't matter because she won the fight. And it's all about momentum in the UFC. And I think she's carrying a little bit of that momentum. So I think she's going to use that to carry forward and move into a really good position. But here's the thing. Here's what I think the UFC can do. The same way Brandon Moreno has taken off from Mexico and become this representative and really just brought up there's a nation behind him. I think Irene Aldana can do something very similar. I think the UFC can promote it that way. It all kind of depends on where that card's going to be. It also depends on whether or not the champ wants to take another fight up featherweight. We don't know. But if I had to pick between the two, I think Aldana's in the pole position, but barely.
All right, Danny, you're up next, man. Share your thoughts.
Man, I think Aldana has to get the next title shot. I agree with Goes. An immediate trilogy fight with Juliana Pena doesn't really make much sense, and I don't really think there's a lot of appetite for that. At 145, I know she's the champ, and she's got to defend 2 belts, but there's not really a long queue. And all the respect to Dumont, but she didn't really impress me a whole lot at UFC 279. I think Aldana is the only fighter, top contender that hasn't fought Amanda Nunes that merits the fight because she's on a 2-fight winning streak. She has a knockout win over Ketlen Vieira, who is the only other person that you could say is deserving of a shot. And she's 4-1 in her past 5 fights, with her only loss being to Holly Holm, who's obviously a stud. So I think Irene Aldana is up next. I think it's a very interesting challenge for Amanda Nunes. I'm not saying she's going to enter the favorite. No way. Always going to favor Amanda Nunes against anybody. But, dude, she's got that Mexican-style boxing. She's got a lot of heart. She's got a lot of war. She's exciting. I do think at least stand-up-wise, Aldana poses an interesting threat, and it could be an exciting fight. Also, I would like to add, because I know some people are saying, yeah, she was probably losing the fight. It was 1 apiece, but then she was losing the 3rd round against Macy Chiasson. But Macy was a 45er. She asked for that catch weight. We know that Aldana was closer to making 135 than she was to 140. And Aldana's big for 135, and Macy looked way bigger than her. Dude, there's no way Macy can make 135. So I do think if you look at the fight, it wasn't like Aldana was being outclassed. A lot of why Aldana was sometimes losing those exchanges was the weight disadvantage. So I think Irene Aldana needs to get the next shot. Plus, Mexico is super hot right now. Jair Rodriguez, Brandon Moreno. You got to push the Mexican talent now.
All right, last one is Mike. Mike, even if you have to take it over, I want to slip one last thing in here. They are going to Brazil in January. So aside from answering the question, personally for me, what do you think, man? Brazil versus Brazil or Mexico versus Brazil? What are your thoughts here?
I don't think either. I don't think Amanda Nunes is going to be on that card in January. From what I'm hearing, I think that might be a little too soon for her to fight at this point. I know she was recently back there, like visiting family. It was the first time she had brought her daughter down there and all that stuff. So yeah, from everything I've heard, she's not going to be on that card unless something changes. So might not matter. And as far as who she's going to fight, I think it's really going to be up to her what she tells the UFC she wants to fight at next. I think Aldana, if it is a 135 fight, she's obviously got the inside track here for all the reasons these guys have laid out. But something in my gut just tells me she wants to do 45 next. And if that's the case, it'll be Norma Dumont. So really, I think it'd be the champ's call here as far as what we see next.
Man, I'm bummed to hear that. We're only in September. That card's not till January. Hopefully Amanda rethinks it. Great episode, fellas. I want to give a shout out in the YouTube comments to Jay Horley. Gave us a nice shout out in last week's comments. Leave a nice comment in there about constructive, whatever you want. I'm always in there throwing elbows with you. Shout out to Austin and Eddie Alvarez as well. Don't forget to keep it locked on MMA Junkie. We got Dana White Contender Series, LFA 142, UFC Fight Night 210. We will be covering all of it. And World MMA Awards. Best media source, MMA Junkie. Would love to get your vote. Mike's also up for best journalist. And lastly, rest in peace, Elias Theodorou. Great MMA fighter, had a great record, and also an awesome human being. Our thoughts and condolences to his family and friends. And folks, we're out of here. We'll see you on next week's Spinning Back Clique.